I need to preface this by saying I am normally a very calm person. I have delivered structural load reports to contractors who thought women couldn't read blueprints and kept my voice perfectly level. I have sat through 3-hour zoning board hearings without once losing my composure. I once accidentally walked into a company all hands where my salary had been pulled up on the projector and still made it to the coffee station without incident. I am, by most measures, a composed professional woman. But I did slap Bryn, and I am prepared to stand behind that decision for the rest of my natural life. Let me back up. My name isn't important for this story, but what is important is that I am 31, a licensed structural engineer, and until 8 months ago, I was married to a man named Weston, 34, who worked in portfolio analysis at a mid-sized investment firm downtown. We had been together for 5 years, married for 2. We owned a decent townhouse, had a shared savings account with an actual balance in it, split the grocery bill, and had a standing reservation at the Thai place on Fridays. It was not glamorous, it was stable, it was ours. Weston, I would later discover, had apparently developed a philosophical objection to stability somewhere around month 14 of our marriage. Specifically, he developed this objection in the direct vicinity of a 27-year-old travel content creator named Bryn, who ran an Instagram account called something insufferable like Untethered Soul Diaries and made a living, loosely defined, by posting photos of herself standing in doorways of cafes in cities that were not Denver. I found out the way most people find out about these things, by accident. A notification I wasn't supposed to see, a name that came up twice too many times, a weekend work trip that I happened to know the Denver office didn't schedule that month because I had a friend there. The usual amateur detective work that nobody ever wants to be good at. When I confronted Weston, he did not deny it. To his credit, or possibly to his eternal detriment, he actually looked relieved. He said he had been meaning to tell me. He said things had gotten complicated. He said Bryn understood him in ways he hadn't expected. He said a lot of words that dissolved into white noise the moment I heard him use the phrase, deeper connection. I asked him how long. 7 months. I asked him if he was in love with her. A pause that lasted approximately 4 business days. Yes. I told him to leave for the weekend. He did. He went to Bryn's apartment, a detail I was not yet aware of, but would discover shortly. The slapping incident happened the following Saturday. I ran into Bryn at the farmer's market 2 miles from our neighborhood. I say ran into, but what I mean is that Weston, in what can only be described as catastrophic judgment, had apparently mentioned to Bryn which farmer's market I frequented, and Bryn, in what can only be described as even worse judgment, had decided to show up there. I recognized her immediately from what I now think of as my research period, which is the 48 hours I spent rage-scrolling her social media at 2 a.m. She was exactly what her Instagram suggested, aggressively ethereal, wearing the kind of flowy linen outfit that signals to the world that you have transcended the concept of fitted clothing. She had the kind of bone structure that made me briefly furious at genetics before I remembered I was there to buy heirloom tomatoes. She approached me. I want to be clear about that. She walked up to me at the farmer's market with the energy of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her car. "I think we should talk," she said, "about Weston, about what this actually is." I told her I didn't think a farmer's market was the right venue. She said, "Weston needs more than a schedule and a shared savings account. Some people are meant to be explored, not managed." I said nothing. She tilted her head with the patience of a woman who has recently discovered meditation and wants everyone to know it, and she said, "You were his routine. I was his escape." Reader, I slapped her. Just once. Open palm. Not my finest hour and not my proudest achievement, but I want you to understand that those words arrived in my brain like a spark, landing on gasoline that had been soaking for 48 hours. There was simply nothing I could have done. She stepped back, looked at me with genuine shock, and said, "That is not the energy of a woman who has done her healing." I left the farmer's market without my tomatoes. Over the following week, Weston and I had several increasingly painful conversations about the state of our marriage. He was not cruel about it. He was worse than cruel. He was sad and confused in that particular way that forces you to be the competent one in a crisis you didn't create. He said he didn't know what he wanted. He said he needed time. He said Bryn made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. I asked him, as calmly as I could manage, whether Bryn's definitions of alive included paying half a mortgage and showing up to his mother's birthday dinner. He did not answer that. What I did not tell Weston during those conversations was that I had already called a divorce attorney. I had also, quietly and without drama, begun making a detailed accounting of our shared assets, our joint accounts, and everything we had built together in 5 years, because I am an engineer by training, and I approach problems with documentation. Weston moved out 3 weeks after the farmer's market. He moved into Bryn's apartment. Bryn's Instagram, which I was still periodically monitoring the way you check a weather app for a storm you already know is coming, bloomed with new content. There were soft focus photos of houseplants and morning coffee, and the caption, "Home is wherever your soul exhales." I read that 4 times to make sure it was real. There was also, notably, no mention of Weston by name. He was just him, a shadowy romantic presence implied in photos of 2 coffee cups and candles burning low. She was building a narrative in public that kept her hands clean while he burned down everything real. Divorce proceedings began in month 2. Weston retained an attorney. I had mine. The split was not as clean as I wanted, because marriage rarely offers clean exits, but my attorney was excellent, and I had documentation going back 4 years. Throughout all of it, Bryn continued to be Bryn. She ran into a mutual acquaintance of ours at a yoga studio and apparently spent 20 minutes explaining that their relationship was different from what people assumed. That Weston had been trapped in a life that didn't serve him. That she had given him permission to be his truest self. That, and I am quoting this secondhand with complete accuracy, she was his routine. I was his escape. The mutual acquaintance texted me immediately. I replied with a single period, which I think expressed the situation adequately. For everyone asking, yes, Weston knew she had come to the farmer's market that day. He claims he didn't know she was going to approach me. I still don't fully believe that, but it doesn't particularly matter anymore. A lot of people are asking about the slap. It was one slap. It was a bad idea, and I do not recommend it. That said, I will never fully regret it. 6 weeks later. I promised I would update this, and here I am, significantly less emotionally stable than I appeared to be in the main post, but significantly more informed, which is honestly a trade I'll take. The news from the front: Bryn is pregnant. Weston told me himself, in a phone call he clearly did not want to make, approximately 8 weeks after he moved out. She was 11 weeks along, which means the timeline is exactly what you think it is. He sounded like a man who had recently understood, for the first time, the full structural consequences of a decision he made at the foundation stage. I said, "Okay." Because I had run out of larger words, he said he was sorry. He said a lot of things. I stopped tracking them after the 3rd sentence because I was doing the math in my head, the way engineers involuntarily do math when confronted with new variables, and the math was not flattering. I told him I hoped it went well for him. Then I hung up and called my attorney, who had already anticipated this development with the weary professionalism of someone who has heard every possible variant of this story across a 20-year career. Bryn, for her part, embraced the pregnancy announcement with the full power of her content creation instincts. Her Instagram shifted overnight from gauzy travel aesthetics to a new chapter, as she described it, in her becoming journey. There were golden hour photos. There was a flat lay of a positive pregnancy test next to a crystal and a cup of herbal tea, which honestly deserves to be studied in a museum of our current cultural moment. There was a caption that said, "Life doesn't ask permission. It just arrives and changes the light." She also found it necessary to tell a mutual connection who told someone else, who eventually looped back to me, that she wanted people to understand this wasn't a situation where she had broken up a happy home. That the home had already been broken before she arrived. That some people are meant to be routines for the people who hold them, and some people are meant to be escapes. That you were his routine. She was his escape. The mental gymnastics required to get from "I had a 7-month affair with a married man" to "I liberated a captive spirit" genuinely deserve a medal, not a good medal, one of those participation trophies they hand out for showing up. Here is where the story starts shifting. Weston's father, Hargrove Sr., as everyone called him, a retired contractor from Colorado Springs who had built a modestly successful excavation business over 30 years, had been in declining health since winter, congestive heart failure. He was 71. He had refused to slow down his entire life, and now his body was doing the slowing for him. I had always liked Hargrove Sr. He was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order, asked about your projects, and once spent 45 minutes on my back patio asking me to explain the structural logic of a bridge I'd worked on, because he was genuinely curious. He had also, in the early days of my relationship with Weston, pulled me aside at a family dinner and told me quietly that Weston was a good boy who sometimes needed someone to hold him steady. I had taken that job seriously. I had perhaps taken it too seriously without examining what I was getting in return. When Weston told me his father had been hospitalized in April, I sent a card. It was the right thing to do, and I did not wrestle with it. Hargrove Sr. had done nothing wrong. What Hargrove Sr. did do during that hospitalization was finally sit down with his estate attorney to finalize arrangements he had been putting off for years. He had a will that was 20 years old. He had the business, a property, some savings, and specific ideas about who deserved what and why. I found out what was in that will through a source I will not identify here, but who was close enough to the family to have legitimate knowledge of its contents. The information arrived 6 weeks ago in a phone call that lasted 22 minutes and that I will think about for the rest of my life. Hargrove Sr. had updated his will. The details are this: the estate, valued at roughly $1.1 million between the business assets, property, and savings, was to be divided primarily between Weston and Weston's sister. There were provisions for a handful of longtime employees. There was one new addition that Hargrove Sr. had specifically requested his attorney include: the unborn child, Weston's child. He had added a trust for the baby. He had not added Bryn. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The man who had watched his son's marriage dissolve, who had received exactly one visit from Bryn in the months since the affair became public, who had apparently formed an opinion of her that he kept to himself with the discipline of a man who knew what he was going to do and saw no point in announcing it early. That man had looked at the situation, assessed it the way contractors assess load-bearing walls, and reached a very specific conclusion. He loved the baby. The baby was a Hargrove. Bryn was a stranger he did not trust, and I don't know if Bryn knew this yet when I'm writing Update 1. I genuinely don't know, but I know I've been sitting with this information for 6 weeks, like a very careful person, holding something fragile, waiting for the right moment to put it down. The divorce is nearly finalized. I am keeping the townhouse. I am keeping my retirement accounts. I am moving forward. Weston is living in Bryn's apartment, about to become a father, and somewhere in the back of his mind, I suspect he is beginning to do his own math. Bryn posted last week about how meaningful it is to build something from nothing, how she and Weston are starting fresh and raw and real, without the scaffolding of other people's expectations. She used the phrase "his routine" again in a comment, explaining to a follower why she felt no guilt about how things had unfolded. You were his routine. She was his escape. I read it while I was having dinner alone in my townhouse, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Because here is what I know that she does not. An escape is not a destination. And the price of being someone's escape is that when the running stops, You're just somewhere strange with no map and no scaffolding, and the real life you thought you'd replaced is still standing exactly where you left it. I'll update again when the time is right. For people asking about Hargrove Sr., he is still alive. He was discharged from the hospital and is home with care. He is not well, but he is present and he is himself. A lot of people are asking whether I told Weston about the will contents. I have not. I am not the executor. It is not my information to deliver. I am simply a woman who keeps documentation and knows when to wait. 3 months later. My divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in July. My attorney called me at 10:14 a.m. I was at my desk reviewing load calculations for a parking structure in Arvada, and I cried for exactly 4 minutes, which felt like the right amount. Then I went and got a very good sandwich. The settlement was fair, not generous to me in the way I might have fantasized about during the darkest months, but fair. I kept the townhouse. I walked away with my financial life intact because I had documented it carefully, and because Weston, whatever else he is, was not interested in being cruel in the legal process. His attorneys did their job and mine did mine, and the result was clean. Then, 11 days after my divorce was finalized, Hargrove Sr. died. He passed peacefully at home on a Thursday morning. He had made it to meet his nurse's suggestion that he try to see the fall colors one more time, and he had sat on his porch in Colorado Springs in early September and apparently done exactly that. Weston's sister called me to tell me herself, which was a kindness I didn't expect and still think about. I went to the service. I sat in the back. I did not speak to Weston or Bryn. I did pay my respects to the family, and I meant every word. Bryn did not attend the funeral. The official explanation was that she was 8 months pregnant and the drive was too much. The actual explanation, from what I understand from Weston's sister, is that she had met Hargrove Sr. precisely twice, and the second time had not gone particularly well. Apparently, the visit involved Bryn describing her influencer work as a form of modern spiritual documentation, and Hargrove Sr., a man who had spent 30 years digging foundations in the Colorado heat, asking her to clarify what that meant in terms of income. The conversation had reportedly concluded with the kind of silence that answers the question. I tell you this not to be unkind about Bryn, but because context matters for what comes next. The will was read approximately 3 weeks after the service. I was not there. I have, however, since spoken to Weston's sister at some length, and the picture she painted was one I will carry with me for a very long time. The estate was as expected in most respects. Weston and his sister each received significant portions. Longtime employees were remembered. The family property in Colorado Springs went to Weston's sister, who had stayed in the area and maintained the relationship with her father through the years. And the trust. Hargrove Sr. had established a trust in the amount of $180,000 for the benefit of Weston's unborn child, to be administered by Weston as trustee and disbursed for the child's education, health care, and general welfare, as determined by the trustee. The trust named the child. The trust named Weston as administrator. The trust contained no disbursement mechanism to Bryn, no right of residency, no living expenses provision. It was structured, according to the estate attorney, as a gift specifically to the grandchild, not to the household. Bryn was not mentioned in the will, not a single line. Now, I need to tell you what happened next with accuracy and without editorializing more than I already have been throughout this entire post, which has already involved considerable editorializing. Bryn had not known the specifics of Hargrove Sr.'s estate before the reading. From what Weston's sister described, she had apparently been operating under the assumption that as Weston's partner and the mother of his child, she would be meaningfully included. She had, in the weeks following the funeral, mentioned to Weston more than once that she hoped the baby would be set up properly. She had also, according to Weston's sister, who had a front row seat to several of these conversations, referenced their fresh start and their real foundation in ways that seemed to assume capital was incoming. When the actual terms of the trust were explained, the room went quiet in a specific way that I am told was very loud. Bryn asked if there had been a mistake. The attorney explained that there was no mistake, that Hargrove Sr. had been very specific in his instructions, that the trust was drafted exactly as he had requested, and that its terms were legally sound. Bryn asked if Weston could restructure the trust to include household expenses. Weston's sister said that Weston did not answer immediately. Bryn said, in the voice of a woman whose entire narrative architecture was beginning to crack at the foundation, he had always talked about wanting something real, something without the scaffolding of routine and obligation, something that was chosen every day instead of just inherited by default. Weston's sister told me she had to leave the room at that point because she was going to say something she couldn't take back. Here is what happened in the weeks that followed, stitched together from conversations with Weston's sister and one brief, strange phone call from Weston himself. Bryn's baby was born in October, a healthy girl. Whatever I feel about Bryn, I mean that genuinely. I am glad the baby is healthy. The baby is innocent. The baby is a Hargrove, and Hargrove Sr. knew that even before she arrived. But the reality of their situation became apparent quickly. Bryn's income as a content creator, which had always been more aesthetic than actual, had been substantially supplemented by Weston's salary throughout the affair and subsequent cohabitation. Her follower count, impressive in isolation, had not converted to meaningful sponsorships. The apartment lease was expensive. The baby required equipment that was also expensive. The trust funds were for the child, not for the rent. Weston's own financial situation, restructured by divorce proceedings, was not the cushion it had previously been. Bryn posted on Instagram 10 days after the birth, a photo of the baby in soft light, which was genuinely lovely. The caption said, "She arrived, and now everything I thought I understood about strength has changed." Below that post, a week later, was a sponsored post for a baby formula brand, her first sponsored content in 8 months. The disclosure hashtag at the bottom said, #ad. I noticed it the way you notice a weather shift before the rain, quietly, without drama, and with the full knowledge that you had seen it coming for a long time. For everyone asking, no, I have not spoken to Weston directly since the phone call I referenced. The one brief conversation we had was him telling me, in a voice that sounded genuinely older than I remembered, that he thought he had understood what he was choosing, and he realized now that he hadn't fully understood anything. I said I hoped he found his way through it. I meant it. I am angry at Weston. I am also done being angry at Weston. Both of those things are true. A lot of people are asking if Bryn ever apologized to me. Read the final update. 2 months later. I will keep this one shorter than the others because the most satisfying endings are usually quieter than you expect them to be. In December, I received a direct message on Instagram from Bryn. I had not blocked her because blocking someone requires a level of active feeling that I had stopped having months ago, and I didn't see the point. The message was long. I will not reproduce all of it, but I will give you the shape of it. She said she had been doing a lot of reflection. She said she realized she had caused real harm and that she had told herself stories about what was happening that allowed her to avoid understanding that. She said she had been wrong to approach me at the farmer's market and that she regretted how that had gone, though she notably did not say she regretted the affair itself, which tells you everything you need to know about where her actual accountability ends. She said she hoped I had been able to build something good after everything. Then she said, I think I understood something about escape without understanding what you escaped toward. I read that sentence twice. I thought about a woman standing in cafe doorways for a living. I thought about a man who needed to be held steady and the person who had done the holding quietly and without credit for years. I thought about a trust fund named for a child that nobody had asked permission to create. I thought about a farmer's market where I left without my tomatoes. I did not respond to the message. There was nothing to say that would have been kind or productive, and I have spent enough of my energy on this situation. I left it on read. The read receipt is its own kind of period at the end of a sentence. Here's where I am now. The townhouse is mine, and I have started a small renovation project on the back porch that I designed myself, which is a very specific kind of satisfaction that I recommend to everyone. I'm not dating anyone yet, and I am genuinely fine with that. My work is going well. I have started going to the farmer's market again, which required more psychological preparation than I expected, but I went, and I bought the tomatoes, and I came home and I made a good sauce, and I ate dinner at my own table in my own house. I have thought a lot about what Bryn said at that first confrontation. You were his routine. I was his escape. I have thought about what she meant by it, and what she understood, and what she didn't. I think she genuinely believed that being someone's escape was a superior position to being someone's routine. I think she had romanticized the idea of being the exciting thing, the new thing, the destination someone runs toward, instead of the place they come home to. What she didn't account for is that routines are what people actually live inside. Routines are mortgage payments and grocery runs and showing up to someone's father's birthday dinner and knowing how they take their coffee and remembering which friend they're worried about and sitting next to them in the hospital waiting room and staying steady when everything is uncertain. Routines are the structural load-bearing elements of a real life. They are not glamorous. They do not photograph well. They are what everything else is built on. An escape is adrenaline. It's a sprint. It's the feeling of running, which feels like freedom right up until you stop running and find out where you actually are. Bryn found out where she was. A one-bedroom apartment in Denver with a newborn and a man who is trying his best but has the specific haunted expression of someone who made a load-bearing decision without reading the engineering report, a trust fund that belongs to her daughter but not to her, a social media following that isn't quite converting, a very good line she used to say over and over that turned out to be exactly right in every way she didn't intend. You were his routine, she was his escape. The routine is still standing, the escape has a price tag, and the math, as it turns out, checks out perfectly. I bought new tomatoes, I went home, I made dinner. That is the whole story.